Okay, author Joel Rosenberg has written extensively about radical Islam and its threat to the West, and he has a new book out called The Third Target. Joel, thanks for joining us
Great to be
again.
with you. Thank you.
We have some latest news about this attack in Paris.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that, and what have you learned? What can you tell us?
Well, first of all, it's horrific. It's the worst terror attack inside France in a couple of decades, according to reports. Last I heard, we had 12 people dead, several wounded. I've seen some of the video. There were neighbors who were shooting video from the rooftop of these people. I mean, literally they were using AK-47s, shooting people point blank in the streets as well as in the offices of this magazine. Now, the magazine is a satirical magazine that has ridiculed ISIS, has ridiculed, there was a cartoon not long ago of ISIS chopping off the head of the Prophet Muhammad. Most recently, just within the last few days, an editorial cartoon showing the leader of the Islamic State, ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, giving New Year's wishes for good health for everyone, good health even though they're chopping off people's heads and killing people. So it's clearly radical Islamic terrorism. The question is whether it's ISIS itself. We don't know that yet. An investigation will ensue.
If it is, what does it say about it?
Well, I think one of the reasons I wrote the novel was to warn people, to show people that if we don't deal decisively and crush ISIS in the Middle East, it's coming. It's coming to Europe. It's coming to the United States. It's coming to Israel. Israel, of course, just this week captured an ISIS cell in the West Bank. They are not. The Islamic State is not interested in being contained to Syria and Iraq. It sees itself as building a regional caliphate or Islamic kingdom and eventually a global kingdom. And it will kill anyone that gets in its way.
Well, we're already seeing some of that spreading to Indonesia. And recently, I know in the Philippines, in South Philippines, Mindanao, where there are many militant Muslims there, MILF and so forth, they're claiming allegiance to ISIS.
ISIS is the new radical Islamic brand. They have come on so fast, so strong. I mean, they're literally, I believe it's a demonic movement. I mean, they're not just terrorizing people. They're engaged in genocide in Syria and Iraq. They're trying to eliminate Christianity from those two countries. And they're slaughtering Muslims by the tens of thousands. And what's happening is Al-Qaeda is looking like the moderates. They are denouncing ISIS for chopping off people's heads, for crucifying people. Al-Qaeda is denouncing ISIS for being too radical. Now, we've entered a bizarre universe when Al-Qaeda is positioning itself as the reasonably sane, in their view, version. But the fact that ISIS has moved so fast, captured 45% of the nation of Iraq, is indicative of its danger. The people being drawn to it are much more bloodthirsty than other, even radical Islamic terrorists. More radical than Hamas, although it's in the same category, more radical than Hezbollah. And I'm concerned that Western leaders, including our president, are simply too complacent. You know, a year ago today, President Obama was giving an interview to The New Yorker, January 7th, 2014, and he said in that interview that ISIS was not serious, that they were a JV team. That misperception, as well as pulling all of American forces out of Iraq, created the vacuum that ISIS has exploited. And I wrote The Third Target to show, to help people understand just how much damage ISIS can do, not just in the region, but beyond, if they are not stopped.
Well, you had mentioned the lack of response in Europe, especially Western Europe. Right. We've seen people go to the streets in Germany, yet the government seems to be opposed to what the people are saying on the streets. They're saying it's maybe Islamophobic and that kind of thing. Why the lack of serious response from the European countries? Well,
European countries, the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, you know, we've got two defense secretaries in the United States that have resigned because the President isn't serious about the war on radical Islam, the war on terror.
But he's not alone. I mean, Europe's
Well,
the
no,
same
you're right.
way.
It's across the board.
Why?
Part of it is exhaustion. I mean, part of these leaders are just like, listen, we've been dealing with this since 2001, and they feel tired. They feel like we got to move on. But that's a complacency. That's a misreading of the danger, as though fighting terrorists for this long should be enough. But the terrorists don't see it that way. They've got new people, new blood, new energy, and they've got a mission. So partly it's exhaustion, but partly it's an ideological view that radical Islam isn't a threat, that we have sort of provoked them as the West, and if we would just stop provoking, if we would just pull back, if we would retreat, then they would not, these folks would not have a reason to attack in Paris or attack in the United States or attack in wherever. That is a misperception, a deeply flawed and a dangerous misreading of the situation. There was an article in the New York Times just before New Year's in which it cited a meeting that one of the top American generals had with a bunch of experts on Islam last summer. And one of the unnamed people were quoted in the article saying, "We don't understand ISIS. We don't know what they want." Well, it's one thing to learn about the inside and the tactics of a terrorist organization, but to not understand what they want is to be burying one's head in the sand. I wrote The Third Target because you can know what they want. Read what they say. They're very clear. They are not hiding.
No.
And so you really have to be
missing
the boat to not know.
How do they miss the boat when you can just go to their website and read what they're saying?
Well, again, I think largely, for the public, it's exhaustion. For leaders, there is it's an ideological view that the West is at fault. This is the sort of blame America, blame ourselves view that caused the West to be weak on Nazism when it was rising in the 30s and weak on communism in the 70s. It took Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Pope John Paul II to come along and say, this is a moral problem. Communism is claiming it's going to take over the world, and if we don't stop it, if we don't draw a line and hold our ground and fight it ideologically as well as in other ways, we're going to lose. And what we need, of course, are leaders in the West, in the United States, in the White House, who understand these issues and understand and have the backbone to deal with it, both ideologically as well as militarily.
One person who does understand is the president of Egypt, al-Sisi, and he recently had a meeting of Islamic leaders and imams at Al-Azhar University where he said Islam needs to change. We need to moderate. We have to change this faith of ours because it's been hijacked by these militants and these extremists. What do you think?
Yeah, I commend him for that.
Is it going to do any good?
Well, he's a pretty influential guy. We'll see. But it's not just him. The king of Jordan, King Abdullah II, has taken the exact same approach, and actually over several years now, working both with moderate Muslim leaders to make theological statements and build a consensus, not just in Jordan, but throughout the Muslim world, that radical Islam is not the Islam that most Muslims want to practice. Now, we could get into a theological argument about whether radical Islam finds its roots in the Quran. It does. But the good news is most Muslims don't think of it that way, or they don't care, and that's good. So I went and I sat down in researching this novel, The Third Target, with the Prime Minister of Jordan, the Foreign Minister, the Interior Minister, the Prince, who is a senior advisor to the king, to try to understand what is their view of ISIS, what is their view of al-Qaeda and radical Islam, how concerned are they about an attack against Jordan or against the Western Alliance, and why are they taking the measures they're taking to be proactively moderate and to take, they are fighting radical Islam, but they're also trying to make this case. And I found that interesting, you know, as an evangelical, as a Jew from the United States, now living in Israel, to sit with Arab leaders in an Arab capital that's on the front lines and understand their angle. I don't know how they'll react to my novel. I hope they find it interesting and helpful. But I found the book was richer for understanding from their mouths and through their eyes the world as they see it.
Wonderful. I can't wait to read it.
Oh, I appreciate that.
But how about other Muslim countries? Yeah. Are they taking the lead in calling for a more moderate Islam?
Generally speaking, there's a huge problem within the Islamic world because the moderates aren't taking the lead and speaking out. There was a season where we saw that happening in Iraq, but over time, you had al-Maliki began to side more with Iran and with the radical Shias than really try to build a pluralistic democratic society. Fortunately, he's gone. The question is whether the new leaders of Iraq are willing to try to build that society. It's a battle right now for the soul of Islam. And the West needs to be encouraging, supporting, assisting any leader in the Muslim world who takes a proactive, moderate position, who will fight ideologically and militarily against radical Muslims like ISIS, because there are not enough of these leaders and they need to be encouraged. And we need to be smart about it.
And finally, what do you see happening in the future, in the months ahead?
2015 is going to be a very dangerous year in the Middle East and more broadly. Radical Islam now has the offensive. President Obama has withdrawn all American forces from Iraq, creating a vacuum. He is taking only half measures to fight ISIS. And the largest strategic threat in 2015 is Iran. Iran is still trying to build nuclear weapons. It's dragging out these negotiations with the West. The West seems to be fine with that. And the twin threat of an Iranian nuclear force and ISIS on the move with billions of dollars and possibly chemical weapons if they can capture them, this is a worst-case scenario that I try to write about in a novel like The Third Target, but this is not fiction. This is playing out right now, and I'm very concerned with the lack of leadership coming from the White House. 2015 could be a very dangerous and possibly deadly year, both in the Middle East, Europe, and possibly here in the United States.
So how should we respond then?
Well, as Americans, I think we need to, the leverage point is Congress. Congress has a number of new leaders who are strong and understand the threat of radical Islam. They can use the power of the purse to try to guide. But honestly, as an evangelical, the hope is prayer, that God raises up kings and he removes them. And I don't want to get cynical. I'm very critical of the president, but I don't want to be a cynic. God changed the heart of Nebuchadnezzar. God changed the heart of King Josiah. God changes the hearts of kings who do not see something correctly in order to be able to see something correctly. And I pray every day that the president would see the threat of radical Islam clearly, and he would start building a strong alliance with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, the Saudis, the Emirates in the Gulf, because there is an emerging alliance between Israel and the West and the Sunni leaders of the Middle East that could take on Iran and ISIS, but the president has bungled it.
Okay, Joel Rosenberg will be praying with you, our
Thank
viewers,
you.
and us here at CBN. Thanks
Amen.
for joining us.
Thank
again.
you.